Think about some of these things, and I wrote, my dad died and was interred in Arlington, and I went out to his funeral at Arlington, and I spent an hour or two walking out there before the ceremony, and then I saw this. He was just a second lieutenant, never saw combat, and I looked at the funeral that they gave him, and this was about 9 months after 9/11, when everybody was saying, oh, this country's evil and wrong and bad and all, we deserved it, and I just said there's nothing fundamentally wrong with this country, and I wrote just a page or two about my experience, and Steve Dembest ran it on USS Clueless and got a lot of attention and made some other blog comments, and somebody said, you really need a blog. So I started writing a blog called Eject, 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 and most blog comments are, it's a paragraph or two several times a day or once every other day. But I would write 15,000 word essays on honor or courage or, power. And so they were infrequent, but they were kind of events, and it just got some attention. So when they started doing these online videos, they just asked me if I wanted to do them, and I said sure, because I had video production background. I thought maybe they'll let me get on camera and do one of them in front of the camera too, and the rest just kind of happened.
Wow, that's so interesting. You mentioned how after 9/11 people were questioning whether the United States deserved it, or and I'm wondering if you think that same mentality is playing into the situation in Syria, because a lot of people are worried to get involved, or a lot of other people think if we get involved there's no good option. So what is your opinion on that, and what do you think the United States should do in Syria?
Well, I have kind of a deep answer for that, and I have a somewhat more shallow answer, so let me give you the shallow answer first. I find it absolutely remarkable and shocking and somewhat enjoyable to watch people who spent their entire political careers destroying George Bush for his actions in Iraq, facing the same difficult issues that George Bush had to face with Iraq, and doing it so infinitely less competently than George Bush did. George Bush spent 14 months getting UN resolutions in place. When he invaded Iraq, he went in with a coalition of 25, 30 nations, and people like Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Harry Reid just crucified him. Now, Barack Obama finds himself in a situation, and rather than doing the work that George Bush did so effectively, he's just unilaterally decided he's just going to go in and kick open the anthill. So that contrast between how easy it is to criticize versus how hard it is to actually do is very important. And I think Barack Obama was such a lightweight, and continues to be, that he has probably not realized until now what George Bush understood from the beginning, that in foreign policy there are not often, it's not a question of here's a good choice and here's a bad choice, here's a bad choice and here's a worse choice. So I think there's that to be said. And very briefly about the situation in Syria, I think it is in the national interest of the United States of America to pursue human freedom around the world. Our political system and our economic system is based on freedom, and as long as somebody in the world is fighting for freedom, then they should be entitled to at least the moral and economic support, if not the military support of the United States. The problem with Syria is neither of these two guys are on our team. You've got two forces that are both antithetical to what we believe, and you've got a tyrannical dictator who's gassing his own country, and then you've got people who represent Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. I don't see any national interest of the United States in this fight, and I don't think we should be involved in this one. Now, in Iraq, by 2005, you had individual citizens risking their lives to go down and vote and put their fingers in purple ink and determine their own destiny. And now there's only two places in the world where Arabs have a fair vote, and that is Iraq and Israel. You had forces of freedom in that fight. I don't see any of them in Syria.
Going back to what you said about the difference between Bush and Obama and the current administration and their actions regarding the Middle East, do you think that's a failure on the media? Is that a failure from the media on the left because there's a double standard there and they're unwilling to cover Bush and Obama with the same consistency?
I think the events of Benghazi and Fast and Furious and especially now Syria and even Libya just a few years ago has convinced many people on the left, what they'll never admit publicly, but that they were wrong about this guy. So it's got to bother them. There's got to be cognitive dissonance on their part, that the fact that they had Code Pink and all these protests against the Iraq war, and now their unicorn, their champion, the Messiah, is talking about not only doing the same thing, but doing it without the various fig leaves that they, that we had before. So I think they're losing confidence in him, although they'll never turn against him publicly. But I think what we really see now with the much lower support on the part of the United States population is a result of a policy that George Bush had that I completely disagreed with, and that was this idea of Colin Powell's that was kind of summed up in "you break it, you buy it." When we went into Iraq and also with Afghanistan, there was the belief and the policy that if we're going to go and invade this nation, then we have an obligation to rebuild the nation. I don't believe that at all. I don't see those two things as connected at all. I can see certainly many cases where foreign powers provoke us into strikes. This doesn't mean we have to go in there and rebuild their country. It doesn't mean we have to put boots on the ground. I think American people, certainly the British people who just voted on this through their parliament just a couple days ago, are concerned that action in Syria would mean another occupation force, years and years of troops on the ground. In our case, 4,000 killed over the course of 4 or 5 years of guerrilla warfare, IEDs. If I were president of the United States, and I play the president, I do a virtual presidency commentary, I would say very clearly to these nations like Assad, if you think that our responding to you militarily means we're going to put our guys on the ground and be part of your civil war for 5 years, you're out of your mind. We are going to launch standoff missile strikes with cruise missiles or whatever else we have, and we're going to reduce or eliminate your ability to wage war on your own people, and we're not going to take a single casualty. We'll spend some money, but we're not going to lose a single American life doing it. That actually increases our influence and increases our deterrent ability and gives us some genuine room for these people to fear us. And they need to fear us, and they don't fear us.
What happened in Egypt has sparked a lot of debate about whether nation building and particularly pushing democracy in the Middle East is an honorable move. Because like what happened in Egypt, sometimes the people voting choose somebody that is not going to be in the best interest of the United States. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
I think Egypt is a great example, and I think what we saw in Iran in 2009 is an even better example. The Iranian Green Revolution were people who wanted freedom. They wanted individual freedom. They wanted to get out of the burqas and the hijabs. They wanted their women to be able to walk the streets. They wanted to get rid of all of these Islamic, Sharia-driven restrictions on fundamental human happiness. And they took to the streets against the worst regime in the world. And the President of the United States of America, in the form of Barack Obama, could not so much as say, "We support you morally." That was a case where you had people fighting for freedom, and if we put a little bit of moral support and maybe some military support behind them, we would have gotten rid of the worst regime in the world. It's the Iranians that caused most of our deaths in Iraq. Most of our guys who were killed in Iraq were killed with IEDs that were designed, built, supplied by, manned by Iranian agents. The situation in Egypt, I think, is also fairly straightforward. Mubarak was a dictator. He was our dictator, but he was a dictator. He was overthrown and replaced with the Muslim Brotherhood, who were worse as far as the American national interests are concerned. But then we saw millions of Egyptians say, "We don't want this Islamic world. We don't want the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't want this. We don't want our women wearing sacks." They got out there and defended Coptic churches against the Muslim Brotherhood. Those people, those secular, freedom-loving Egyptians, should have been supported by the United States. And frankly, this is all actually very simple, and we don't have a coherent foreign policy because we don't understand the philosophy. If I was President of the United States, I would simply say, we support human freedom all around the globe. Period. And so if there's a conflict where one side is on the side of freedom and the other side isn't, we're on the side of freedom. If neither side is on the side of freedom, then we don't have a dog in this fight and we're not going to get involved.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit. You've been very tough on the mainstream media. Your latest video on the drug lien during the Trayvon Martin case got over 1.8 million views, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I want to know if they've given you any pushback, if they've been hard on you, if you've received any negative attention from that.
Do you know, I have to say, of all the things about my career that really interest me, I do not get anything like that kind of negative feedback. I was good friends with Andrew Breitbart, who got death threats pretty much by the hour. I don't get any of that, and I suspect it might be because I try to stay out of the trenches and try to get up into geostationary orbit and talk about philosophy. And the cases I try to make, as I made with the Trayvon Martin case, I don't just say things. I don't just have an opinion. I lay some evidence down. I laid the evidence of he wasn't going to the store to get candy and an iced tea. He was going to the store to get the ingredients he needed to make a codeine-based narcotic. Nobody knew that. Nobody knew that George Zimmerman was the least racist person in his community. Nobody knew that either. And this information was out there. It wasn't like we had to uncover this, but the news media is such, it's not a press anymore. It's the audiovisual department for the Democratic Party. And so when you lay unerrable facts out there, and the beautiful thing about the Trayvon thing as an example was, this wasn't my opinion. This was Trayvon Martin in his own words. It was his screen grabs from Facebook. That's incontrovertible evidence, and those kind of things have an effect.
Bill Whittle, thanks very much. Our time has run out, but we thank you for stopping.